All right, everybody, welcome back. Thank you so much for sticking through that break. Like I said, like I said, we are going to be covering the Chicago Cubs offseason in our continuing series, MLB offseason files. This is going to be part 3. We've talked about the Nationals and the Yankees. You can go check those out on YouTube. But if you're just joining us, you missed a good segment. We just finished talking about the court storming debate here with the most recent incidents of this season and the weekend. Talked about whether or not I think it's good. Uh, what are some solutions we could have? Yeah, that's what you missed. But remember, before we get too far into this segment, you can, if you want to be a bigger part of the show, you can leave a donation or a tip by going to streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Again, you leave a message and a tip, donation. It'll scroll across that screen. You'll be famous for a second. We'll have a little conversation. You can go to streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Without further ado, let's just get right into the MLB offseason files, Part 3, the Chicago Cubs. Chicago Cubs, by a lot of people's metrics, had a disappointing offseason from where they were a season ago. The Chicago Cubs are a team that were fighting for a wild card spot at the end of last season. They were kind of surprisingly good. They obviously missed they missed the playoffs, but the the tear they were on in the beginning, they were actually buyers at the deadline. They had huge turnarounds from guys like Cody Bellinger, who, big news, has just re-signed with the Cubs over the weekend. And outside of that, the Cubs, they really didn't do much in the offseason. The Chicago Cubs kind of sat down and failed on a lot of their goals. What they were trying to do is they were trying to go get Shohei Ohtani. They were trying to get Yamamoto. They were trying to get these big free agent. They were trying to get these big free agents, and they failed. They didn't really get anyone in this offseason. You know, they just ended up losing the offseason, losing their big fish. They were second place in a lot of it, third place even in some. Now, 3-year, $80 million deal for Cody Bellinger to return to the Cubs, who had finally, come back from a frankly disappointing fall off since he won the MVP. Outside of that, the Cubs really didn't do anything. A team that adding Bellinger back really helps them. It makes them back into contenders again, or I guess playoff contenders. I won't go as far as saying that they are World Series contenders, because they did lose some guys. They lost Marcus Stroman, pitcher. They lost Candelario, who they had traded for, no longer on the team. There's a bunch of people that they lost, and they kind of sat put. The Central isn't the strongest division. It's a division that they can win, really. But outside of Cody Bellinger, they didn't really do much. Coming off a season that really was solid for them. It just kind of is a disappointing offseason for a team that needed to make a couple moves. So, that's what the Cubs are up to right now. They also, we want to talk about some projections for next season. So the Cubs, a team that last season barely missed the playoffs. A team finished 83-79, second in the division. Like I said, just missed that 7th seed in the wild card. Kind of take a step back in a time where a lot of teams in their division and in the NL kind of took a step forward. We're talking about, especially in their division, the St. Louis Cardinals had a miserable season last year. They really felt the loss of Yadier Molina when he left, and they went out and they went and fixed. They went out and got some pitching. They did a really good job with, I guess you would call, the bargain bin pitching. The Pirates and the Reds, both super young teams with some potential. You know, the Reds especially, they called up a lot of young guys, and they all kind of hit a little bit last season. We'll see how they continue to develop. Same thing with the Pirates. And then the Brewers just are what the Brewers are. No, they're a good team. They lost a couple big pieces, but they are what they are. So heading into a season where you don't have a lot of changes made, where you haven't made these big moves that you were targeting, and the rest of the teams in your division have, it's a little bit disappointing. It's Now, the Cubs weren't a team that were in position to make that huge move, to overpay, to outbid the Dodgers on Shohei Ohtani. They weren't really in a position to do that. But what they were in a position to do was, talk about maybe make some smaller moves, some moves that'll keep them in contention, maybe push them forward. Obviously, bringing back Cody Bellinger, that was a big question for them, and they came back and they did that today, 3 years, $80 million. But the lack of moves in the offseason is kind of uninspiring. I expect them to take a small step back. 83 wins last year. I'm probably putting their win total somewhere around 80, 70, 78 to 80 wins. Again, that division is going to be a lot tougher. You're not going to be able to beat up as much on some of those teams that you play all the time. That's a couple games lost. And out of everyone in that division, the Cubs might have had one of the weaker off seasons. They really didn't get a lot done. And for a team that was where they were last season, assuming that they would like to continue competing, it's not a good look. It really is just a disappointing offseason for them. So, I'd love to hear what you guys think about the Chicago Cubs, what's coming up for them. I think they're going to miss the playoffs. I think it's going to be really similar to last season. Like I said, they didn't make too many changes. They brought back the big piece that they lost. So, not sure exactly how much this is going to change. The rest of that division got better, and they just kind of sat on their hands. Didn't get a lot done. But they could compete for a wild card. That's their ceiling. Their ceiling is a wild card. I don't think they're winning their division. There's a lot of good teams there. But they could compete for a wild card, and once you get in the playoffs, you can make noise with anyone. Just got to get hot at the right time. But the Cubs offseason has not been very good. Obviously, bringing back Cody Bellinger is huge. He's going to hopefully provide that bat. And that's the real question with Cody Bellinger, which is why I understand why he hadn't been signed yet. There obviously were a bunch of Scott Boras clients that had not been signed, and Cody Bellinger was one of those four. And he made it all the way through free agency. Through free agency, spring training has already started, and I'm sure he's been working. But with how inconsistent he's been in prior seasons, with how he went from winning an MVP to being benched to being on the Cubs and turning it around, we don't know exactly what he's going to be. We've seen this before where people ball out on their contract year. You know, they go get that big money and then they fall off a cliff. It happens in every sport. There's a whole bunch of examples. I'm sure you guys can think of some. But the $80 million over 3 years really isn't as much as people were expecting him to get. He was looking at getting a six-figure contract. Or, excuse me, getting into the triple digits of millions. I guess that'd be 9 figures. But 80 million, not too shabby. Not too shabby at all. So hopefully he can continue his stretch, but that really is the big question. If he can go back and be what he was last season or his MVP season, this is absolutely worth it. But once we get the Cody Bellinger of the couple years before this year, 80 million is a lot to sink into him. But yeah, moving on, in our next segment, we're going to be talking about the Rookie of the Year race between Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren. We'll talk a little bit about where that race stands. We'll talk about the history of it, and what we expect, or what I expect to happen in that race. And then we'll close out our show talking about the NFL running back market. There's been a whole bunch of rumors coming out about franchise tag being used or not being used on a lot of running backs. It kind of mirrors last season, so we'll do some comparison there, talk a little bit about it. Thank you everybody so much for tuning into this segment. We will be right back.